Member for Fredericton West Hanwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's always a pleasure to follow my colleague and friend, the Minister of Energy. In fact, I don't often get the opportunity to do it, but I'm fortunate to do it today, Mr. Speaker. And I do have some great stuff to talk to this House about with regard to Mactaquac Dam. It's at the center of my riding, Mr. Speaker. It's an incredible facility, and it's part of an incredibly beautiful landscape that makes up that part of the province. But before I do that, Mr. Speaker, there's some comments made by the Minister of Energy that I would be remiss if I did not reply to. Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of back and forth, past and future. But my concern, Mr. Speaker, is that with this government, it's always back to the future. The problem that we have is that, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, people that don't understand their history are doomed to repeat it. And what we have here in this government is a set of policies and a set of people that are taking us back to the problems of the past, Mr. Speaker. So if we, on this side of the House, occasionally make reference to our history, to the things that happened in the immediate past to New Brunswickers that were visited upon them by members of the current government, Mr. Speaker, it's because of our concern for the future. Because it's the same people doing the same old tricks again, Mr. Speaker. And that's going to lead us down one path, and that, I'm afraid, is a bad path for the people of New Brunswick. So, Mr. Speaker, we've heard a bit about Sean Graham's visit to Mactaquac Dam. It's unfortunate that it has to be raised in question period, that the minister couldn't have been more transparent about it before then, and it was unfortunate that, in fact, he couldn't answer the questions in question period. He had to wait until he got outside the House to actually find out what was going on, and he released those directly to the media. So it's always my disappointment when matters are dealt with, matters that are raised in this legislature are dealt with outside the legislature, because this is where the people's representatives are sent, and I always go back to that, Mr. Speaker. But it's important to remember that what we do here is important, and this is the place where ministers are to be held to account, not outside the doors of this legislature. They should bring their facts to the floor of the legislature. But it is now a fact that Sean Graham was touring Mactaquac Dam, and I as well, Mr. Speaker, I don't have an issue with NB Power looking at flexible solutions in terms of financing, in terms of options for Mactaquac Dam. But it does concern me, Mr. Speaker, that this minister is willing to stand up in this House and defend his good friend and former boss, Sean Graham. Because this is the same Sean Graham, Mr. Speaker. This man has a record. And that's why we're concerned about his actions. It's the same Sean Graham that led a government that proposed to sell NB Power to Quebec in a secret deal. So he's got a history of making secret deals. Unfortunately for him, those secret deals aren't secrets anymore. But at the time, it was a secret deal to sell NB Power to Quebec, Mr. Speaker, without consultation from the people. And that's a significant thing. This guy's got a record. And this government, members of this government have a record. They're part of that secret deal. And so when we, on this side of the House, see those red flags go up, it causes us concern. It's also the same Sean Graham, and as we've said before, many members of the same cabinet that led us down the road to the ATCON scandal. And Mr. Speaker, we're waiting for the Auditor General to do her due diligence. We've heard a lot about due diligence. Well, let's let the Auditor General do her due diligence into the ATCON affair. Because it's Sean Graham and the current Minister of Energy that were around that table that decided to send $70 million of taxpayers' money outside the province to other people, to give it away, to flush it down the toilet, Mr. Speaker. That is a historical fact. And moreover, it's that same Sean Graham that was found guilty of a conflict of interest in that very matter. So if we're concerned on this side of the House that this gentleman who has been found guilty of conflict of interest, who led a secret deal already, and who has sent millions of dollars of taxpayers' money down the drain, when we see him engaging with NB Power on a professional basis, for which I assume he is taking some sort of compensation, when we see him engaging in these processes, presumably with the approval or at least the sanction of this government, Mr. Speaker, that's a red flag. And I understand that the former Minister of Energy, Jack Keir, is in this building today being consulted. So in these familiar faces, we have enough of the ATCON ministers in the current government, Mr. Speaker. We don't need to dredge up other ghosts from the past. But, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing the same people and the same processes. So that's my concern. But I wanted to move away from the Minister of Energy's negative comments, and I want to talk about some positive stuff. I would actually like to applaud NB Power and their CEO, Gaetan Thomas, because they have done an excellent job in leading a consultation about this matter. I must say, hand on heart, I'm very impressed with the work that NB Power has done. And Mr. Speaker, I do believe in due diligence, and I think they are doing an excellent job of doing it. They have presented us with 3 options. Maybe we hear a 4th, although I'd like a little bit of clarity on that. It's not crystal clear to me what the 4th option is. I think it's extension of the current facility, but that's not clear. But certainly the other 3 options are very clear. Indeed, we've laid them out clearly in our resolution right here. And I think that NB Power has done a really good job of online consultation, of in-person consultations around the province. And in fact, I led a consultation over a year ago with a number of the members here that were interested in this issue at King's Landing. And NB Power sent some officials there, and they did an excellent job in talking to the crowd about some of the options and their concerns. So there's really good work being done there, Mr. Speaker. And more importantly, I think that Mactaquac Dam is a key part of what New Brunswick needs to embrace for our future, and that is responsible resource development. Mr. Speaker, that extends to a lot of things. That extends to development of our natural gas resources in this province. That's a key to responsible resource development. Some of the mining projects that the Minister of Energy and Mines referenced today, which seem to be stagnating, Mr. Speaker, those are an important part of our future. We need to press the play button on those options, to move those mining projects forward. As well, the pipeline that the Minister of Energy mentioned. And Mr. Speaker, I've yet to see any progress on that file, but it's an important file. It needs to be part of our resource development plan for this province. And another key part of that is our hydropower. And the center point of our hydropower is indeed Mactaquac Dam. So it needs to be part of that fabric, that plan of responsible resource development. And Mr. Speaker, again, I've often heard great platitudes coming out of the government, and I've heard the Minister of Energy refer to a number of these projects. And Mr. Speaker, where's the beef? Show us the progress. Because on a lot of these files, the mine, the pipeline, these are all issues that are stagnating. We need some life brought into these. These are essential to the future of New Brunswick, and we need a government and a minister that's going to propel them forward. What we need, Mr. Speaker, is a long-term, strategic, sustainable source of energy in this province. And why do we need that? Well, first of all, of course, we need it for our citizens, for their homes, to fuel all the things that make their lives beneficial here in the province. But more importantly, we need it for industry. There's still a great deal of heavy industry left in this province. Mr. Speaker, what heavy industry we have left, we need to keep. And we need to use a strong, long-term, sustainable source of cheap energy to make sure that those industries are economically viable into the long term. And that's why projects like Mactaquac Dam are so important. That's why, as well, the pipeline is important, and that's why natural gas development are important, because these are the things that are fueling the heavy industry of this province. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, if we can supply a strategic, long-term, reasonably priced source of cheap energy, if we can do that, heavy industry will grow. And we could take things like the potash mine in Sussex, and we could turn it into a fertilizer plant. Because in order to get to that value-added product, we need to have a cheap, long-term, sustainable source of energy. And that could be natural gas, and it should be the Mactaquac Dam. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Minister is right. It's not exclusive of cost. Obviously, we have to look at the cost of these projects. And there are options out there. One option, one of the cheapest sources of energy right now in the global market are high-efficiency natural gas energy production plants. It is one choice. The per kilowatt-hour cost of burning natural gas in these high-energy production plants is quite low compared to other sources of energy. So, Mr. Speaker, I go back to the government and I say, listen, it's time to lift that moratorium and look again at the option of developing natural gas in this province, because it is a potential long-term source of energy. The other option is to buy hydro elsewhere. And there are a number of projects in the Atlantic provinces in Quebec that are coming online, particularly those out of Newfoundland, massive hydroelectric projects that are going to provide a long-term sustainable source of energy. And if if NB Power is looking to its future, it needs to look to those projects and look at the option of buying that energy, but buying it on a long-term strategic basis. Because, Mr. Speaker, buying it for 10 years or even 20 years is not enough. We need to look at this supply over a 50-year period. So there are some options out there for a long-term sustainable source of energy. But I believe that what we have here at Mactaquac Dam is an excellent solution to that problem. An excellent way to provide New Brunswick with part of its demand for long-term, sustainable, affordable energy. And, Mr. Speaker, it's more than just economics. There are some other factors. I'm the first to say the price is important. But there are other factors as well. And the Premier and some of the members of his staff, I don't think he brought any other ministers with him, but he certainly took some staff with him, recently got back from Paris, and we know there's increasing pressure on the province of New Brunswick to lower its carbon emissions. And it's my concern, we just had a resolution about taxes. It's my concern that taxes are going to increase, and one of those taxes may be a carbon tax, which I don't support, Mr. Speaker. But there's no doubt that this province needs to manage its carbon emissions, and one of the ways to do that is by using hydropower. Now, there are some carbon issues with large use of concrete, so that's something that has to be considered as well. But generally speaking, Mr. Speaker, the hydropower is a green, efficient source of energy. So that's one of the other considerations outside of financial considerations that needs to be taken into account. But we had an eloquent speech from my colleague, the member for Carleton York, earlier, and he outlined the history of Mactaquac Dam and the effects on the people of that region and people of our region here in Fredericton. And I know my colleague from Fredericton Grand Lake and my colleague from Carleton York, they know personally the effects of this dam, this project that happened in the 60s. They know how that affected them and their families, and there's a significant investment. And we've heard this government speak about the concept of social license, which is a concept that is ill-defined and, frankly, Mr. Speaker, may not lead us down the right road. But I want to add to that the concept of social capital, because there has been a tremendous investment in the social capital of this project. And that's not something we can just overlook. As we've heard, there is a social impact, a massive social impact of uprooting all those families and those farms and disrupting that rural way of life just minutes' drive away from here, Mr. Speaker. And that was something that had an incredible effect on communities. In fact, communities were eliminated. They were moved entirely. And so we need to consider the weight of that social contract when we consider the future of Mactaquac Dam. Indeed, when that project was started, when it was undertaken, it was designed to be a much longer project than it's turned out to be in terms of payback. And so there's still some residual, what I would call residual social capital there that we have to consider, Mr. Speaker. This was supposed to be a 100-year project. It's a 50-year project. So we've got a social capital deficit that we need to deal with. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was concerned this week when we saw the introduction of amendments to the Crown Construction Act. And these amendments specifically seek to exclude NB Power from the normal procurement process for major capital projects. And, Mr. Speaker, we haven't been through the committee stage on that bill yet, but I'm very concerned about that. And I wonder what the motivation is, Mr. Speaker, because as we know, we're debating it now, it's clear to everyone that a multi-billion-dollar project is coming, which is the refurbishment of Mactaquac Dam. And it is not clear why we would ever seek to exempt that from procurement processes. I agree completely with the idea of running NB Power as a business, but it needs to be subject to rigorous procurement processes. And, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that this current act that's before us is going to serve that purpose. Now, Mr. Speaker, we heard a little bit from the Minister of Energy about Point Lepreau. And I hope that this government lives up to its obligation to seek some finances from the federal government on that matter. God knows they certainly tortured us with that for long enough. But now that they've got the opportunity, they have the ear of the federal government, it's time for them to step up and seek some compensation. And we heard a little bit about the real costs of this project. But, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, I think that this Mactaquac Dam, as it says in this resolution, is an invaluable resource for this province. It's an opportunity for this province to secure for itself long-term, strategic, affordable power. And it won't fill the whole grid, Mr. Speaker, but it fills a significant chunk of it. And as we've heard, there's also an amount of social capital in this project. And we need to capitalize on that. So this is an opportunity for this government to step forward, make a decision in 2016 about supporting the Mactaquac Dam, providing for the long-term energy needs of this province, and taking care of the people of this province. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.